This podcast is brought to you by Search Tempo. If you want your business to get found on Google, visit searchtempo.com. That's searchtempo.com. Unlike many SEO agencies, Search Tempo uses Australian university-trained English-speaking experts to help you generate more business through Google. Search Tempo has helped businesses like yours since 2007. Packages start from just $295 a month. Visit searchtempo.com. That's searchtempo.com and see your business at the top of the Google search engine.
The Nick Holt Podcast.
I love you.
Cam, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me back, Nick.
Over the last couple of episodes that we've done this, we've spoken about COVID and we've spoken about the economic side of COVID-19. And one of the big themes in that was viewing the potential of lives lost at the beginning of the COVID lockdown that would be caused from lockdown. We've done this topic fairly exhaustively. It seems to be going round and round in circles as we now enter close to 2 years of this. So I want to start with a quote that I think kind of encapsulates where we are in all of this. So in 2015, a Canadian media figure, he's a journalist and he's the founder of Monocle and Wallpaper magazines. That's Tyler Brûlé. He came here for Vivid Festival in 2015 and he wasn't very impressed with where Australia was at as a country. And this is in 2015. Tyler Brûlé said, "Australia is on the verge of becoming the world's dumbest nation. There will be a collapse of common sense here if health and safety wins out on every single discussion."
I've got to laugh. That's something a lot of my friends from abroad notice when they come as well. What's your view, Nick, when you travel? Do you notice the safetyism and the lack of common sense?
I notice the freedom of going to another nation, especially a poorer nation than Australia. I find that the freedom is found in the fact that these regulations and safety restrictions are in some cases non-existent. At the very least, they're peeled right back, and you get this sense that the state is not always on your back.
Yeah, look, I think Australia has a reputation internationally as being a nanny state in many ways, and it's not just compared with India or Indonesia or this, the safety regulations that they lack, for example, in the construction sector or when they do roadworks. You can go to Europe, and last time I was in Austria, I tell this story. I saw a guy operating a machine on the street, digging it up, and another guy with a truck that he was loading. And all they did was they taped off the area with a few witches' hats. There were no stop-go people. There were nobody else. There was no people standing on shovels and auditing. People used common sense to go, hey, I can see a truck. Here's some witches' hats. I'll just walk around. I don't need a stop-go man on the footpath or the street. It just made sense and it was efficient. And I think if you go then to the developing world, it's really costly, a lot of the regulations you have. So they're very careful about their health and safety rules and only implementing the ones that really get a good bang for your buck in terms of, improving health and reducing risks. And Australia is by far at the other end of that spectrum. We're one of only a couple of countries in the world with bicycle helmet laws. We obsess about health and safety. And COVID, I think, has really, capped that off. We're still, we're almost the last country still panicking. Everywhere else, Europe, North America, essentially opened up now, and we're still panicking. So, yeah, I think you're spot on, and that guy's observation 6 years ago has held true.
So this could very well be symptomatic of a country that's simply become a little bit too rich, too decadent.
I would say it probably correlates in some ways, but there are plenty of very wealthy states in the United States, for example, richest human beings on the planet, just about, who are at the other end of the spectrum as well. So I definitely think, it's kind of partly just we're a wealthy country, but there's definitely a cultural element there as well in terms of what's a personal responsibility, what's a social responsibility, and where do we carve that up, and in what domains. So, for example, on health and safety, we very much know you don't take personal risks. We'll tell you how to behave. But then in financial realm, wherever we very much are happy to tell people, well, you've got to look after yourself. You've got to save for your retirement yourself. We're not going to have a social system here. You've got to look after your kids. We're not going to have much of a social, parenting payment. So I find it quite interesting that we should really be doing the opposite. On those financial matters, we should have very much a good social support network, but on the personal choice matters and the health and the risk-taking matters, that should be up to the individuals more so, because you know your local circumstances very well, and so you can judge them. You don't have to be told, oh, on average, this works. You must wear a bicycle helmet. Well, I'm just teaching my kid in the park on the grass to ride, and it's really annoying them, and I don't want them to be distracted. I'm sure they'll be fine. But no, you can't make that choice in your local context. So that sort of thing really, really bugs me. And in many ways, it's thoughtless. And so I could go on a bit of a rant about that. But people, the helmet laws have always bugged me because they're just not that effective. And in fact, I did a master's degree in economics. And one of the topics that I studied was called the rebound effect. When you change the risk, people will change their behavior. You don't get to reduce risk with your safety rule and people's behavior stays the same. So think about sunscreen. If we have good, powerful sunscreens, people will stay in the sun longer, right? It's not the fact that time in the sun is held constant when you protect yourself from that risk. It's the same with helmet laws. And for example, one of the offsetting effects is cars will pass you much closer if you're wearing a helmet than if you're not wearing a helmet, because they think, oh, watch out for that guy, he's not even wearing a helmet. Well, maybe you should not get too close to anyone, helmet or not. You really think that little piece of foam is going to help if you run them over? We also know there's offsetting effects when you try and improve safety in one area that comes at a cost at another. So we know, for example, all the research has shown that helmets, because they increase the circumference of your head, increase torsional injuries. So they make your head rotate more if you actually hit it. And rotational injuries are worse for brain damage rather than impact injuries. And so we've finally, after decades, realized that. So in motorcycle helmets, you'll notice that the high standard helmets now have a sleeve inside it that lets you rotate inside the shell, right?
Mm.
All of these things, they're subtle, and you need to know the details. But we don't. Australians are very much like, that helmet, that's just a magic, force field. Go and do whatever you want now. And you're like, no, that's not how health and risk and safety works. It's really subtle and context dependent. COVID is a great example of that lack of context and subtlety in the health and safety area. We've just panicked, and on vaccines we can't talk about the balance of risks and the local risks and the idiosyncratic personal risk. No, it's all about you wear helmets and you wear seatbelts, therefore do this. And there was an article the other day talking about that, and I thought, well, that's nonsense, right? It's really nonsense.
The helmet's interesting because for the state to say, we're going to utilise some soft paternalism here, state paternalism, because we think that it's in your interest to wear the bike helmet, right? As you've just spoken about, that may not actually have any sort of grounding in fact.
Mm.
But the same thing has happened with the mask.
Oh.
It's that idea that, well, it seems like it makes sense, right? It's sophistry in a way from the government.
It is.
Very cleverly disguised argument that seems like it sounds right. But much like the bike helmet, you got to wonder how many people are just wearing the masks simply so they don't get fined.
Yeah. Most people.
I think so too.
Well, you go to any country without compulsory bike helmets and no one wears them, right? And you know, just look at masks. As soon as you walk out of a shopping centre, people rip them off as quick as they can. No one's going to be wearing them. People go with whatever anyone else is doing. If no one's wearing it, you'll be the odd one out.
But you can also be the centre of a kind of an irrational meltdown. Let's say, for example, I walk into a shop, I'm not wearing the mask because I've just seen my GP. He says you're getting rhinoplasty next week. I don't want you to wear a mask for the next 3 weeks. You go into the shop, there it is. Why aren't you wearing the mask? Bang, right? That goes from 0 to 100 very quickly. All of a sudden, it goes through your mind that, hang on a second, despite being completely armed with reason, I'm the one that's going to be made to look like a psychopath here. Yeah,
That's how it is. That's what happens, I guess, when you have that dictate where when you impose from the top this broad brush regulation in all circumstances, it allows you to ignore your local circumstances and your local risks at the time. And that's true in construction, right? And mining, which is a high risk sector. People get injured and die on the workplace. So there's a lot of health and safety rules, but it's well known that if everyone's following the rules, no one thinks about safety because they think the rules have protected them, right? So that's the sort of offsetting effect you get there.
Mm.
I wonder if that 2015 article noticed that if you don't wear a bike helmet, you'll get yelled at by cars driving past you in the street. Which is funny, right? Because wearing a helmet while driving a car is actually probably a better safety mechanism than wearing a helmet riding a bike. Like, you don't see race car drivers not wearing helmets.
Sure.
Right? And cars go much faster than bikes. So the question is, well, if you're really about health and safety, why are you choosing this thing instead of car helmets? Compulsory car helmets would have saved millions of lives. And, by the logic of the sort of nanny state hardcore people, they're negligent for not lobbying for that by their own standard, right? And they're negligent for not following that, even though it's not a rule. They should take some personal responsibility. I don't want them clogging up the hospital if they have a car accident, put their head through the window or whatever the case may be. That's their logic, not mine. And they're not doing it, so what are we to think?
Well, we of course know that irony is lost on some people.
Yes.
Interestingly, I think with that article saying that there will be a complete collapse of common sense has been circumvented, or at least a government has come into place where it said common sense is not the pinnacle. It's not the best way for society to operate harmoniously. We need to impose not common sense, but a common law, right? So then the tighter those laws are, the less they make sense, then people lose common sense as a society.
Correct. There's a feedback. We are in a feedback loop of having common sense based on local conditions. And I really think that's important, right? Because you got to, with rulemaking, it's very hard to make it flexible enough for different conditions, right? And so you end up with something that you guess is optimal on average, but is actually optimal in no particular circumstance, because no circumstance is exactly this one. And so that's a bit of a problem. And then the more you rely on checking off, right? Ticking off the rules. Did I comply? Yes. Tick, 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 tick. Therefore, it's a good job. I've done the right thing. No.
Yeah. Is it optimal?
It's a bit like, building a house, complying with the building code, but not being able to actually use it at all because the design's completely wrong. Like, you've lost the common sense.
Yes.
Yes, your wall's not going to fall down. Yes, your steps are the right height. Yes, you did that.
But it's too narrow for you to walk through.
You can't walk through this, you can't do this, you can't put furniture, it doesn't let the light in. It's all the wrong thing, right? But you've complied strictly with every rule, but you've missed the common sense or the practicality or the local conditions, right? Maybe you've got the right windows, but you've got a tall building next door, you can't see out of them, right? You're like, well, that was great, you followed all the rules. So that's super common in Australia, and I definitely, back when we could travel internationally, a lot of my friends from abroad would notice, like, I can't believe you guys just follow that rule. People will wear bike helmets because it's safe and then not signal that they're going to cross the lane and use a hand signal because it's not compulsory to do so. I would say using a hand signal is probably really good for your safety compared to that bike helmet when you're traveling at 20 kilometers an hour.
So over time, right, you have this build-up of rule-based order as opposed to common sense. And then you start to see other problems because overall the society starts becoming less and less optimal, or the optimization struggles.
I even think there's actually more demand for more rules because people aren't trained to solve problems locally, you know. So in construction, before we had all these rules, what were there? Well, there was a culture and a sort of a trade that you learnt. Oh, don't do it this way, you'll slice your finger. Don't do it this way. Don't lift materials on a crane over all these people, right? So there was this sort of culture of rules of thumb that evolved that worked in certain circumstances in certain industries. And I think we've lost that sort of... that mastery of a trade or a mastery of your circumstance.
You've got to be able to make mistakes to master that, right?
That's you do. But
you've got to slice the thumb off, so to speak. Because...
someone else has to at some point in time, right? But we can then all learn from that and you know, pass down that wisdom.
Right. So when someone cuts their thumb off, do you go and then develop a 65-page protocol on how to not, or do you go, Jared cut his thumb off, mate, be very careful from now on, right?
Yeah. So, and I think we also neglect technological solutions and go for regulatory ones, okay? And in construction, you know, we build saws that turn off and can't cut soft things, right? And we build better power tools that have better safety, right? So we almost solve the problem at the source. You know, the person who makes the tool and the person who operates it have a good feedback loop between them. You know, I don't want to buy this old outdated tool. If you can do a better one, we'll buy it, right? So they've got this sort of this feedback loop that improves and ticks things off in a way that the ticking off a regulatory checkbox can't do. And I think there's you know, Australia is way down the regulatory tick box end compared to the let's solve this at the source. And hey, maybe there's many situations where they work well. For example, you can't sell that very dangerous type of equipment anymore. You must have a guard on this or this on this. That's great. But to get that feedback, and this is another idea of being, you know, tangentially related, but we really need to be more involved with trial and error in both policy making and, you know, how we build buildings, how we do physical investments as well. We're very much get some consultant to tell us what the right thing to do is, and then we push that, and then we all stand behind it because, you know, we think it's right because it's got a 100-page economic report. You know, it must be right. It costs money. It's got good graphs and tables. It must be right. Let's stand behind it. And I think that is very much where we're at with this feedback of this mindset we're in. Whereas the alternative, and I think, you know, that's what the benefits of free markets are in many ways, and maybe we'll get into that, is that you just sort of do trial and error. You go, yeah, we've got this idea, we've got this social issue or issue we want to try and fix. This is what we think. We're just going to trial it and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, we'll trial something else. In fact, maybe we'll trial 3 different things. Maybe in Brisbane they're going to do this, and maybe in here they're going to do this. And let's just try and see what we can learn, because we need a bit of humility on not only the safety stuff, but on all sorts of regulations that, you know, we don't actually know up front what's going to work. It might make sense, we might have good stories, good reasons why, but until you've done it, very, very hard to know. I'm a big fan of this trial and error policy. And if the regulation's not working, just reverse it, It's not that difficult.
This might be a good segue from that into the discussion of free markets. I think that within the trial and error, you need to allow humans to be humans as well, which means that humans have a spark of an idea and they want to follow that idea, right? When I was in high school in year 12, the canteen raised the price of Coca-Colas, of cans of soft drink, from $1 to $1.20, right? Scandalous, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, scandalous.
So I said, well, I'm not going to have a bar of that. At the time, Woolworths were selling cans of Coke for about 63 cents, right? So I went and bought, on the first day, I bought a 30 block of Coke, right? There was a vacant locker next to me. I got an esky and I took ice and I had a till. And I undercut the tuck shop by 20 cents to get it back to the price of $1, right? Within a month, I was doing bigger numbers than the tuck shop on cans of soft drink. And this went on for a while until the school marshal found out about it, and he's like, open it up. He's busted it open, and there's cans of Coke, and I'd branched out into chips at that stage. And he said, I love the entrepreneurship, but shut it down, right? So in a way, without thinking too much about it, I kind of just wanted to, I wasn't visualizing myself as a radical kind of Adam Smith here, but I wanted to make a little bit of money and I saw an opportunity. That regulates the market, right? Because there was no justification for them to raise the price of that Coke that much.
That's exactly right. I mean, you've just described why economists free markets is a bit of a loaded term. We could maybe unpick that later, but they like competition. We'll call it competition. Because you can't just get away with something if someone else can set up shop next to you and do a better job. That's the whole point. And in many ways, competition is the trial and error process. I sort of propose that we operate more in the regulatory and policy space. That's the whole reason it works well. You design a new type of shoe. Well, if it's better than the previous ones, you get it. If you then rest on your laurels and someone else then improves on it again in 10 years' time, then bad luck to you. And what has society got? Well, society's got 2 generations of design improvements on this product, whatever the case may be, eyeglasses, musical instruments, goggles. That's the whole point of competition. So yeah, talking about the free market. So Australia's quite interesting because in health and education, these 2 big controversial areas, we have this parallel system. We have the public provider and private providers. And you know what? That actually has this good feedback mechanism. If the public system is doing a terrible job, people at the margin will go into the private system. So there's some pressure on the public system in education and health to actually function reasonably effectively and efficiently. And so I think that type of thing is not that well understood in economics. We talk about, there's a market failure, therefore we must do this public provision. And they miss this dynamic feedback that, do you know what? The existence of a private market in the same thing as a public market, they both are a check on each other. So let me give you an example. If you're in a small town and you're a council and you need to build roads, well, you can have your own public road construction guys who just build everything. Now that organisation, as all organisations do, will get lazy and pad their own nest and not build roads very efficiently over time. I'm not saying it's a public sector thing, because if you had a single private provider as well, or a small group who could collude directly or indirectly to get all the contracts and share them, they would get lazy and they'd pad their pockets as well. But if you had both, some private and a public option, perhaps there would be a little bit more tension there, or pressure on each to do the best job. So that's just an example of where you need that competitive element. And my view is it doesn't matter if it comes from a public organisation or not. And if the public organisation fails, fine, roll it up. We're doing trial and error here as well. We'll implement a new In 5 years' time, we'll try something new. We'll see how these guys go.
Yeah, interestingly though, with COVID, there was no competition of ideas between public and private, right? Health, we're talking here.
Isn't that interesting?
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And dangerous in terms of a poor outcome or a stunted outcome of not having the best available options for your country.
Yeah, that's funny you say that, because although in Australia the debate is very constrained, at least we have places in the world that did something different. So we do have that experiment. We've got the Swedens, we've got the Floridas, right? The classic examples. So we can't actually pretend that we haven't seen an alternative, right? So it's not as bad as it could be, I think, if the whole world jumped on board. Can you imagine? If no one had tried anything different and the whole world was...
Everyone would still be where we are.
Yeah, they would still be where we are, and no one would be able to think differently. We'd be so constrained in our thinking that we wouldn't even perceive that what we'd done is wrong, because everyone had done it.
So we are constrained in our thinking and in our policy making because we have not looked at these other examples and allowed them to enter into the marketplace of ideas and competition. I'm talking about Sweden, for example.
Yeah.
We've either buried the truth of that or rubbished it.
That's an amazing example of the power of the news media, because imagine if you're in any other industry where you're trying to sell a product, some kind of commercial tool, and you've got someone in Sweden who makes a better one for half the price, right? How do you keep that knowledge from people? Like, you can try, right? But they have an incentive to let you know that, you know what, I've got a better tool for half the price, and everyone knows it. I've got the evidence, you can see it in front of you. And eventually that feedback or that information will change minds. Now, the question is, on this issue, when it's not a physical product, it's very hard to judge. We're good at telling each other stories. There's this whole greater good propaganda element. Maybe we need more than that. And I think, just to be, a prediction, the first Australian state that just opens the border and said, we're done, the rest will just copy. They will have to. The people will see that life is totally fine there, and you'll get this tension. That's a better outcome. We want that one. We don't want the one we've got. We've got the dodgy product here. We want that one, and politicians will respond. And I think it's just got to be a bit closer to home for us here in Australia with our very inward-looking media landscape.
Really inward-looking, and also, in order to kind of black out the Swedens and the US states and various other countries now that are having success, and we were speaking earlier off air about even a lot of these Nordic countries are now banning Moderna.
Yeah, correct.
Vaccines that not too long ago, perhaps even still, I'm not sure, some of our health experts are not just touting, but kind of demanding we get. So we've put a kind of a control ring around the development of a kind of marketplace of good ideas.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's what we've done. The media, as an analogy, the media and the I guess the incentives politically are to stifle the competition for ideas. And I mean, that's true of everyone, right? It's true in competition for goods and services. You've got an incentive to stifle the competition, but your consumer, when you're a consumer of a product and you know what it is, you drive the car, you wear the clothes, whatever the case is, you know if it's good or bad, you can tell. But the stories in the media, the repetition makes it very hard to unpick what's good and what's bad. And then that becomes social as well, right? When all your friends have watched the same media, so that reinforces. You can't just stand there and go, hey, look, this phone is better than that phone. Look what it does, side by side.
When they're all using the same phone.
They're all using the same phone. Everyone's doing it. And you can't judge, right? You say Sweden was a success. Everyone goes, yeah, but how many old people do you want to kill? And you're like, well, who dies? Old people. That's what we do. That's what we call the stage of life before you die.
So in a lot of ways, what's happened, I think, is that we've regulated things so heavily through rules that are not based on common sense, that now by the time something like COVID-19 hits, it's having an effect on many institutions at once. And it's exposing the lack of, and maybe you can correct me if you think this is the wrong term, but I say wisdom, and I'll define wisdom as the kind of ability here to look outside of our country and to look at calmly with reason and rationality and say, well, if it's not that bad over there, how can it be so bad here? It's the same illness. Mm-hmm. So we've destroyed the marketplace of ideas in health, in the media, and that's exposed dumb systems now.
In a way, yeah, dumb systems is a nice descriptor, actually. And we get trapped into those when we have a culture of adhering to the rules rather than a culture of improving and experimenting with better rules over time. And you could see, for example, in Brisbane, we experimented with turn left on a red light at the traffic lights to see how that would be. And so that trial's over. We should be having trials left, right, and centre of those ways to improve the rules or unwind rules and say, hey, we've had this rule. We're not sure how it goes. We're going to have a 2-year break and see if it makes any difference. And if it doesn't, and people like it, it's very easy after that to just turn it off.
And this is COVID. Is this why we are here?
Well, the question is, why didn't we just try a lockdown somewhere, or evaluate it? Why didn't we try and evaluate and go, we locked down, things still had a big outbreak. Maybe they're not working. Let's just unwind it and see if it changes anything. Like, what have you got to lose? If you think it's not working, then not doing it is also just fine. We should have, been trialing that, but we didn't. And the cost, I think, is enormous. And we've almost backed ourselves into a corner about not thinking about the cost of lockdown. This is the biggest rule.
Did we ever think about it?
No, we didn't. But this is the biggest rule we've ever come up with, I think, in terms of social impact, apart from going to war. So I think, you're spot on that we were primed to want a one rule for all dumb system response, and that's what we got with the lockdowns. And I actually think it's funny because the way they're justified in many ways, and this is a bit bugbear of mine, is this precautionary principle. We must do something, right? Because this could be catastrophic. And when there's a catastrophic risk, it's better to spend a lot of money reducing the chances, right? But then the question is, well, lockdown's never been tried. Closing the borders for 2 years, surely there's a chance of catastrophic fallout from this in terms of lives lost, the delayed healthcare, the increasing costs for people, and we know that income and quality of life and longevity correlate. So, look, it's just a funny old world. We've painted ourselves into this corner. We've gone, you kind of got to think about this in reverse. If we had, previous to COVID, an illness that killed that many people each year, and it was seasonal and it was respiratory, and we were used to that, and someone turned up and said, hey guys, I think we should lock down the country. Have you noticed that these people get a cough and they have this respiratory illness when they're old? I reckon what we should do is close the borders and lock down the country and see if we can get a handle on this. You'd be laughed out of the room if the sequence of events was reversed in many ways, if COVID was always here and someone proposed it.
Definitely. You can't do this without the precise chain of events that took place. And I think that it began with genuine fear, right? There was a pandemic hitting the world. And I believe the average politician shared that genuine fear at the beginning, right? So that fear led to political action. That political action was then seen by the politicians in terms of policy as popular.
Yeah.
Right? So their popularity actually went up.
It did.
Now, at that point, at that juncture point, they had a choice. Do we mitigate the fear and risk losing some popularity? Or do we, at the very least, maintain that fear through to the the 2022 election. So this is at play as well.
I'm totally with you. There's definitely a feedback to the fear, and the tough guy politics paid politically, electorally. They became popular. Look at the Western Australian vote. Even, the corrupt premiers of New South Wales and Victoria are very popular because of that tough guy politics that they implemented. So yeah, that's definitely the incentive to keep that going as long as possible. In fact, I think a lot of your chain of events that you've just described is the one I believe is the case. This reinforcing, our polls went up when we were tough, okay, and when people are scared, they look to a leader. Well, we wouldn't want them to not be scared. Now, a lot of the critique of COVID policy is, why are our leaders outsourcing stuff to the chief health officers? Who are these people? We want our leaders to be up there doing stuff. And I think people have misunderstood how that functions. The leaders are making the decisions, or the political parties are. The chief health officer is just an actor put up in front of a microphone to say a line that suits the political agenda of the day. And if they wouldn't say it, they'd get some other bureaucrat to do it for them. It also provides a bit of insurance if things go bad, because you can say, it's just following the health advice. So if this whole fear story that you think was working politically unravels, you will see, blame the chief health officer. And we may see that at some point next year in one state or another, I don't know. But you can see that they're playing the role because they get rewarded. You watch where these chief health officers end up when we've moved on from that role. They'll be rewarded for playing their part in the theatrics of politics.
The problem with we're just following the expert advice. What the world has demonstrated now is that not only is that expert advice flawed, in many instances it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's actually scientifically incorrect. So when it comes time to vote again, I think it will backfire on them, because my position as a voter would be, well, you shouldn't have followed that advice for so long. That's a bad management decision at the very least.
Yeah.
I would have flicked that CHO and put someone else in, but they haven't, have they?
No. There is no penalty for being wrong in the expert advice discipline, or if you look, all the COVIDs are just one of many cases of this. All the modelling. What's the modelling? It's just your assumptions about what's going to happen in numbers. And it was all wrong. Almost nobody. I've yet to discover someone who forecast anything near what the sequence of the pandemic was. Everyone was wrong by orders of magnitude.
Massively.
And do you know what's funny? Journalists still want to talk to them about their forecasts. What is with that? Now, let me go back to you about the competition and the sort of experimentation. If I was a miner and I had a geologist try and tell me what I'm going to get out of these rocks, and every time I drilled they were wrong, would I just keep going back to them and say, I'd like your opinion on this, please, because I've got a lot of money to invest riding on your expert advice? No, you wouldn't. You'd tell your friends, this person would be done. Absolutely done. Their reputation would be tarnished. Why is it in these political areas where, I don't know, what element is different there? Where, Niall Ferguson, is it? He forecast, for SARS and mad cow, totally off the charts nonsense.
He's been wrong almost every time.
Should have been out of the club before COVID, and yet he was wrong on COVID again, and still he gets airplay. Tell me, maybe you've got some insight there, Nick, but if I was a journalist, why would I call this person?
I think in terms of journalism, I think it's laziness. It's much easier to trust the great grand Doherty Institute, right, which is the federal government's modelling system. and then you fit in the club. They're all using that modelling system. So you again, you go back into this idea of wanting to fit in and tell the same narrative that everyone else is around, because then you keep your job, and that's one element to it. But I would say also that the only reason, if you were a geologist, if you were a miner and you kept going to the same geologist, right, to find out what's in that rock, and you keep getting the wrong thing back, the only reason someone might do that is if they wanted that information to be incorrect.
Yeah.
Because you're preventing someone else
Correct.
from getting the real rock, which is over there, that's got the gold in it, or the diamonds.
Yes. Well, I think you're right. I think people don't... I think the truth is, won't sell newspapers, for starters, but also it's not politically favourable in terms of COVID and in terms of many topics, unfortunately. And, maybe it's a good way to wrap up, but the lack of trust in the media, they have themselves to blame in many ways. I think you were saying you saw the ABC critique of the independent journalist Real Rushkin. And he basically was just insulting a guy who's started a career as an independent journalist. He live streams 5 hours at a time, and Paul Barry says, "Where's your context?" He's like, you edit this into 30 seconds and tell me you're providing context? So there's going to be a real tension there, and I think it's about time, actually. We're finally getting that competitive tension you need in journalism, and if people reject the mainstream to go to independent journalists to get the information, because the independent journalists, the only thing that they can win on is being right. They can't win by getting political drops, getting inside scoops of political announcements, but they can win by being right and interviewing people who make correct forecasts, and that's where the audience will go. So I think that's a great, I think that independent journalism is going to save journalism in many ways, because the last probably, all these sorts of institutions or cultures, they go in cycles, they degrade over time, unless they're threatened from the outside, in which case their very existence is threatened, they get their act together. That's this competitive feedback, and I see that happening in journalism. So I'd be very worried about, for example, the censorship on Facebook of independent media and whatnot, because that competitive tension in journalism is a good thing. That's what we used to like. We used to have anti-competitive laws to make sure you couldn't merge and only have a handful of news outlets. That was the whole point. But now we've got this organically, and quite luckily.
Yes, and I think that before COVID-19, the media and government were the two least trusted institutions in the country, right? That trust got artificially resuscitated briefly through COVID-19, through what I would say is dishonesty by both the media and the government, at the very least lying through omission. Mm-hmm. That resuscitation was brief, and I see it going the other way now. At
a much more rapid pace.
Yes, and they will go much slower than they were
correct
before COVID started.
Totally agree. And COVID, is probably still the Achilles heel of the mainstream press, because they keep essentially lying. I saw a recent correction in the New York Times. I'm not sure if you saw that, where they overestimated deaths of children from COVID by a factor of 20, and they underestimated some risk by a factor of 10, or they just reported the wrong numbers, essentially undoing their whole story, which was this fear story, in a correction the next day. And the more that circulates, you can be wrong in the mainstream media as long as you make people scared and say COVID's bad. You can be wrong by a factor of 100. If you're wrong on the other way by a factor of a half, mate, you'll never get that published anywhere.
No.
Because that's their bias. And I think the more, it's going to get worse as the world wakes up to COVID and people aren't scared anymore.
It's backfired, I think, and it will backfire.
Right, it's backfired. So, look, I really think that's the future, and I really think that's where the next bit of competition on that media landscape is with the censorship, because that's how the traditional guys win. They're not going to win by interviewing experts who get things right or accurately representing the news compared to the independent journalists. They're going to win by just having their network in social media censor the independents.
Or maybe another way is, which I see it as, it's not so much that the independent journalists are here to take over, but are more here to facilitate the demise of those two, especially the media institution, in trust-wise, right? So afterwards, when everyone does wake up to COVID-19 and realises that the media cannot be trusted overall, broadly speaking, then perhaps we'll see a return back to just common sense. I don't need someone on television that looks nice to tell me what's going on in the world. I can use my 5 senses, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately then, common sense.
Oh, look, I hope you're right, Nick. I hope a media landscape less based in fear and more on the facts is part of that cultural change we need. And remember, we started talking about the rules-based sort of way we do things in Australia. I really would hope to see that sort of facilitates some change in that, that rule-based area as well.
Cameron Murray, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks again, Nick.
The Nick Holt Podcast.